Welcome to Stories with Liz, and welcome to my new studio. So excited to have it up and running, though I need to look into the lighting situation some more. But it kind of fits today as we're doing at least a semi-gothic story. It gets a little horrifying at some point. It is called The Terribly Strange Bed. It was written by Wilkie Collins and first released in 1852. The Terribly Strange Bed. Shortly after my education at college was finished, I happened to be staying at Paris with an English friend. We were both young men then and lived, I'm afraid, rather a wild life in the delightful city of our sojourn. One night we were idling about the neighborhood of the Palais Royal, doubtful to what amusements we should next betake ourselves. My friend proposed a visit to Frascati's, but his suggestion was not to my taste. I knew Frascati's, as the French saying is, by heart, had lost and won plenty of 5 franc pieces there, merely for amusement's sake, until it was amusement no longer, and was thoroughly tired, in fact, of all the ghastly respectabilities of such a social anomaly as a respectable gambling house. "For heaven's sake," I said to my friend, "let us go somewhere where we can see a little genuine blackguard, poverty-stricken gambling, with no false gingerbread glitter thrown over it all. Let us get away from fashionable Frascati's to a house where they won't mind letting in a man with a ragged coat, or a man with no coat, ragged or otherwise." "Very well," said my friend, "we needn't go out of the Palais Royal to find the sort of company you want. Here's the place just before us, as blackguard a place, by all reports, as you could possibly wish to see." In another minute we arrived at the door and entered the house. When we got upstairs and had left our hats and sticks with the doorkeeper, we were admitted into the chief gambling room. We did not find many people assembled there, but few as the men were who looked up at us on our entrance. They were all types, immeasurably true types, of their respective class. We had come to see blackguards, but these men were something worse. There is a comic side, more or less appreciable, in all blackguardism. Here there was nothing but tragedy, mute, weird tragedy. The quiet in the room was horrible. The thin, haggard, long-haired young man, whose sunken eyes fiercely watched the turning up of the cards, never spoke. The flabby, fat-faced, pimply player, who picked his piece of pasteboard perseveringly to register how often black won and how often red, never spoke. The dirty, wrinkled old man with the vulture eyes and the darned greatcoat, who had lost his last sou and still looked on desperately after he could play no longer, never spoke. Even the voice of the croupier sounded as if it were strangely dulled and thickened in the atmosphere of the room. I had entered the place to laugh, but the spectacle before me was something to weep over. I soon found it necessary to take refuge in excitement from the depressions of spirits which was fast stealing on me. Unfortunately, I sought the nearest excitement by going to the table and beginning to play. Still more unfortunately, as the event will show, I won prodigiously, won incredibly. Won at such a rate that the regular players at the table crowded round me and, staring at my stakes with hungry, superstitious eyes, whispered to one another that the English stranger was going to break the bank. The game was rouge et noir. I had played it in every city in Europe without, however, the care or the wish to study the theory of chances, the philosopher's stone of all gamblers. And a gambler in the strict sense of the word, I had never been. I was heart whole from the corroding passion for play. My gambling was mere idle amusement. I never resorted to it by necessity, because I never knew what it was to want money. I never practiced it so incessantly as to lose more than I could afford, or to gain more than I could coolly pocket without being thrown off my balance by my good luck. In short, I had hitherto frequented gambling tables just as I had frequented ballroom and opera houses, because they amused me and because I had nothing better to do with my leisure hours. But on this occasion it was very different. Now, for the first time in my life, I felt what the passion for play really was. My success first bewildered, and then, in the most literal meaning of the word, intoxicated me. Incredible as it may appear, it is nevertheless true that I only lost when I attempted to estimate chances and played according to previous calculations. If I left everything to luck and stalked without any care of consideration, I was sure to win in the face of every recognized probability in favor of the bank. At first some of the men present ventured their money safely enough on my color, but I speedily increased my stakes to sums which they dared not risk. One after another they left off playing, and breathlessly looked on at my game. Still, time after time, I stalked higher and higher, and still won. The excitement in the room rose to fever pitch. The silence was interrupted by a deep murmured chorus of oaths and exclamations in different languages every time the gold was shoveled across to my side of the table. Even the imperturbable croupier dashed his rake to the floor in a French fury of astonishment at my success. But one man present preserved his self-possession, and that man was my friend. He came to my side and whispered in English, begging me to leave the place, satisfied with what I had already gained. I must do him the justice to say that he repeated his warnings and entreaties several times, and only left me and went away after I had rejected his advice. I was to all intents and purposes gambling drunk, in terms which rendered it impossible for him to address me again that night. Shortly after he had gone, a hoarse voice behind me cried, "Permit me, dear sir, permit me to restore to their proper place 2 Napoleons which you have dropped. Wonderful luck, sir! I pledge you my word of honor as an old soldier, in the course of my long experience in this sort of thing, I never saw such luck as yours, never. Go on, sir. Sacre mille bombes. Go on boldly and break the bank." I turned round and saw, nodding and smiling at me with inveterate civility, a tall man dressed in a frogged and braided surtout. If I had been in my senses, I should have considered him, personally, as being rather a suspicious specimen of old soldier. He had goggling, bloodshot eyes, mangy mustachios, and a broken nose. His voice betrayed a barrack-room intonation of the worst order, and he had the dirtiest pair of hands I ever saw, even in France. These little personal peculiarities exercised, however, no repelling influence on me. In the mad excitement, the reckless triumph of that moment, I was ready to fraternize with anybody who encouraged me in my game. I accepted the old soldier's offered pinch of snuff, clapped him on the back, and swore he was the honestest fellow in the world, the most glorious relic of the Grand Army that I ever met. "Go on," cried my military friend, snapping his fingers in ecstasy. "Go on and win. Break the bank. Mille tonnerres, my gallant English comrade, break the bank." And I did go on. Went on at such a rate that in another quarter of an hour the croupier called out, "Gentlemen, the bank has discontinued for tonight." All the notes, all the gold in the bank, now lay in a heap under my hands. The whole floating capital of the gambling house was waiting to pour into my pockets. "Tie up the money in your pocket handkerchief, my worthy sir," said the old soldier, as I willingly plunged my hands into the heap of gold. "Tie it up, as we used to tie up a bit of dinner in the Grand Army. Your winnings are too heavy for any breeches pockets that were ever sewed. There, that's it. Shove them in, notes and all. Crédit." What luck! Stop! Another Napoleon on the floor. Ah, sacre petit, pour les zones de Napoleon. Have I found 3 at last? Now then, sir, 2 tight double knots each way with your honorable permission, and the money's safe. Feel it, fortunate sir. Hard and round as a cannonball. Ah, bah! If they only had fired such cannonballs at us at Austerlitz. Nom d'une pipe, if they only had. And now, as an ancient grenadier of an ex-brave of the French army, what remains for me to do? I ask what? Simply this: to entreat my valued English friend to drink a bottle of champagne with me, and toast to the goddess Fortune in foaming goblets before we part. Excellent ex-brave, convivial ancient grenadier, champagne by all means, an English cheer for an old soldier. Hurrah, hurrah! Another English cheer for the goddess Fortune. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah! Bravo, the Englishmen, the amiable, gracious Englishmen, in whose veins circulate the vivacious blood of France. Another glass? Ah, bah! The bottle is empty. Never mind. Vive la vin! I, the old soldier, order another bottle, and half a pound of bonbons with it. No, no, ex-brave. Never. Ancient grenadier, your bottle last time, my bottle this. Behold it, toast away, the French army, the great Napoleon, the present company, the croupier, the honest croupier's wife and daughter, if he has any, the ladies generally, everybody in the world. By the time the second bottle of champagne was emptied, I felt as if I had been drinking liquid fire. My brain seemed all aflame. No excess in wine had ever had this effect on me before in my life. Was it the result of a stimulant acting upon my system when I was in a highly excited state? Was my stomach in particularly disordered condition? Or was the champagne amazingly strong? "Ex-brave of the French army," cried I, in a mad state of exhilaration, "I am on fire! How are you? Let us have a third bottle of champagne to put the fire out." The soldier wagged his head, rolled his goggle eyes, until I expected to see them slip out of their sockets, placed his dirty forefinger by the side of his broken nose, solemnly ejaculated, "Coffee!" and immediately ran off into an inner room. The word pronounced by the eccentric veteran seemed to have a magical effect on the rest of the company present. With one accord, they all rose to depart. Probably they had expected to profit by my intoxication, but finding that my new friend was benevolently bent on preventing me from getting dead drunk, had now abandoned all hope of thriving pleasantly on my winnings. Whatever their motive might be, at any rate they went away in a body. When the old soldier returned and sat down again opposite to me at the table, we had the room to ourselves. I could see the croupier in a sort of vestibule which opened out of it, eating his supper in solitude. The silence was now deeper than ever. A sudden change, too, had come over the ex-brave. He assumed a pretentiously solemn look, and when he spoke to me again, his speech was ornamented by no oaths, enforced by no finger-snapping, evidenced by no apostrophes or exclamation. "Listen, my dear sir," said he, in mysterious confidential tones. "Listen to an old soldier's advice. I have been to the mistress of the house, a very charming woman with a genius for cookery, to impress on her the necessity of making us some particularly strong and good coffee. You must drain this coffee in order to get rid of your little amiable exaltation of spirits before you think of going home. You must, my good and gracious friend. With all that money to take home tonight, it is a sacred duty to yourself to have your wits about you. You are known to be a winner to an enormous extent by several gentlemen present tonight, who, in a certain point of view, are very worthy and excellent fellows. But they are mortal men, my dear sir, and they have their amiable weaknesses. Need I say more? Oh, no, no, you understand me. Now this is what you must do. Send for a cabriolet when you feel quite well again. Draw up all the windows when you get into it, and tell the driver to take you home only through the large and well-lit thoroughfares. Do this, and you and your money will be safe. Do this, and you will thank an old soldier for giving you a word of honest advice." Just as the ex-brave ended his oration, in very lachrymose tones, the coffee came in, ready poured into 2 cups. My attentive friend handed me one of the cups with a bow. I was parched with thirst, and drank it off at a draught. Almost instantly afterwards I was seized with a fit of giddiness, and felt more completely intoxicated than ever. The room whirled round and round furiously. The old soldier seemed to be regularly bobbing up and down before me like the piston of a steam engine. I was half deafened by a violent singing in my ears. A feeling of utter bewilderness, helplessness, idiocy overcame me. I rose from my chair, holding on by the table to keep my balance, and stammered out that I felt dreadfully unwell. So unwell that I did not know how I was to get home. "My dear friend," answered the old soldier, and even his voice seemed to be bobbing up and down as he spoke. "My dear friend, it would be madness to go home in your state. You would be sure to lose your money. You might be robbed and murdered with the greatest ease. I am going to sleep here. Do you sleep here too? They make up capital beds in this house. Take one, sleep off the effect of the wine, and go home safely with your winnings tomorrow. Tomorrow, in broad daylight." I had but 2 ideas left. One, that I must never let go hold of my handkerchief full of money. The other, that I must lie down somewhere immediately and fall into comfortable sleep. So I agreed to the proposal about the bed, and took the offered arm of the old soldier, carrying my money with my disengaged hand. Preceded by the croupier, we passed along some passages and up a flight of stairs into the bedroom which I was to occupy. The ex-brave shook me warmly by the hand, proposed that we should breakfast together, and then, followed by the croupier, left me for the night. I ran to the washhand stand, drank some of the water in my jug, poured the rest out and plunged my face into it, and then sat down in a chair and tried to compose myself. I soon felt better. The change for my lungs from the fetid atmosphere of the gambling room to the cool air of the apartment I now occupied, the almost equally refreshing change for my eyes from the glaring gaslight of the salon of the dim, quiet flicker of one bedroom candle, aided wonderfully the restorative effects of the cold water. The giddiness left me, and I began to feel a bit like a reasonable being again. My first thought was of the risk of sleeping all night in a gambling house. My second of the still greater risk of trying to get out after the house was closed, and of going home alone at night through the streets of Paris with a large sum of money about me. I had slept on worse places than this on my travels, so I determined to lock, bolt, and barricade my door, and take my chances till next morning. Accordingly, I secured myself against all intrusions, looked under the bed and into the cupboard, tried the fastenings of the window, and then, satisfied that I had taken every proper precaution, pulled off my upper clothing, put my light, which was a dim one, on the hearth among a feathery litter of wood ashes, and got into bed with a handkerchief full of money under my pillow. I soon felt not only that I could not go to sleep, but that I could not even close my eyes. I was wide awake and in a high fever. Every nerve in my body trembled. Every one of my senses seemed to be preternaturally sharpened. I tossed and rolled and tried every kind of position, and perseveringly sought out the coldest corner of the bed, and all to no purpose. Now I thrust my arms over the clothes. Now I poked them under the clothes. Now I violently shot my legs straight out down to the bottom of the bed. Now I convulsively coiled them up as near my chin as they would go. Now I shook out my crumpled pillow, changed it into the cool side, patted it flat, and lay down quietly on my back. Now I fiercely doubled in two, set it up on end, thrust it against the board of the bed, and tried a sitting posture. Every effort was in vain, and yet, unless I found out some method of diverting my mind, I felt certain that I was in the condition to imagine all sorts of horrors, to rack my brain with forebodings of every possible and impossible danger, in short, to pass the night in suffering all conceivable varieties of nervous terror. I raised myself on my elbow and looked about the room, which was brightened by a lovely moonlight pouring straight through the window, to see if it contained any pictures or ornaments that I could at all clearly distinguish, while my eyes wandered from wall to wall. A remembrance of Le Maistre's delightful little book, Voyage autour de ma chambre, occurred to me. I resolved to imitate the French author and find occupation and amusement enough to relieve the tedium of my wakefulness by making a mental inventory of every article of furniture I could see, and by following up to their sources the multitude of association which even a chair, a table, or a washstand may be made to call forth. In the nervous, unsettled state of my mind at the moment, I found it much easier to make my inventory than to make my reflections, and thereupon soon gave up all hope of thinking in Le Maistre's fanciful track, or indeed of thinking at all. I looked about the room, at the different articles of furniture, and did nothing more. There was first the bed I was lying in, a four-poster bed of all things in the world to meet in Paris. Yes, a thoroughly clumsy British four-poster, with the regular top lined with chintz, the regular fringed valance all around, the regular stifling unwholesome curtains, which I remembered having mechanically drawn back against the posts, without particularly noticing the bed when I first got into the room. Then there was the marble-topped washstand, from which the water I had spilt in my hurry to pour it out was still dripping, slowly and more slowly, onto the brick floor. Then two small chairs, with my coat, waistcoat, and trousers flung on them. Then a large elbow chair covered with dirty white dimity, with my cravat and shirt collar thrown over the back. Then a chest of drawers with two of the brass handles off and troddy, broken china inkstand placed on it, by way of ornament on the top. Then the dressing table, adorned by a very small looking-glass and a very large pincushion. Then the window, an unusually large window. Then a dark old picture, which the feeble candle dimly showed me. It was the picture of a fellow in a high Spanish hat, crowned with a plume of towering feathers, a swarthy, sinister ruffian, looking upward, shading his eyes with his hand and looking intensely upward. It may be at some tall gallows at which he was going to be hanged. At any rate, he had the appearance of thoroughly deserving it. This picture put a kind of constraint upon me to look upward to, at the top of the bed. It was a gloomy and not an interesting object, and I looked back at the picture. I counted the feathers in the man's hat. They stood out in relief. 3 white, 2 green. I observed the crown of his hat, which was a conical shape according to the fashion supposed to have been favored by Goody of Fawkes. I wondered what he was looking up at. It couldn't be at the stars. Such a desperado was neither astrologer nor astronomer. It must be at the high gallows, and he was going to be hanged presently. Would the executioner come in possession of his cornical crowned hat and plume of feathers? I counted the feathers again, 3 white and 2 green. While I still lingered over this very improving intellectual employment, my thoughts insensibly began to wander. The moonlight shining into the room reminded me of a certain moonlit night in England, the night after a picnic party in a Welsh valley. Every incident of the drive homeward through lovely scenery, which the moonlight made lovelier than ever, came back to my remembrance. Though I had never given the picnic a thought for years, though if I had tried to recollect it, I could certainly have recalled little or nothing of that scene long past, of all the wonderful faculties that help to tell us we are immortal, which speaks the sublime truth more eloquently than memory. Here was I in a strange house of the most suspicious character, in a situation of uncertainty and even of peril, which might seem to make the cool exercise of my recollection almost out of the question, nevertheless remembering, quite involuntary, places, people, conversations, minute circumstances of every kind which I had thought forgotten forever, which I could not possibly have recollected at will, even under the most favourable aspires. And what cause had produced in a moment the whole of this strange, complicated, mysterious effect? Nothing but some rays of moonlight shining in through my bedroom window. I was still thinking of the picnic and of our merriment, of the drive home, of the sentimental young lady who would quote Childe Harold because it was moonlight. I was absorbed by these past scenes and past amusements when in an instant the thread on which my memories hung snapped asunder. My attention immediately came back to present things more vividly than ever, and I found myself, I neither knew why nor wherefore, looking hard at the picture again. Looking for what? Good God! The man had pulled his hat down on his brows. No, the hat itself was gone. Where was the conical crown? Where the feathers, 3 white, 2 green? Not there. In the place of the hat and feathers, what dusky object was it now that hid his forehead, his eyes, his shading hand? Was the bed moving?